I gave my life to Jesus 25 years ago when I was 17. I'm married to Mike, and we've been married for 25 years. And we have 7 children and 5 grandchildren. God has blessed us and helped us beyond what we could ever have imagined. Our life is good, and that's a miracle, because there was a time when our life wasn't good. Actually, it was really bad. So when I was about 3, my parents separated, and it really affected me. So right from that young age, I started to struggle with a lot of fear, rejection, and insecurity. And those 3 things followed me everywhere and had a huge grip on me. Growing up, I always wanted a proper family and a mum and a dad. At night, I'd get so scared that someone would break into our house, and I used to think, if my dad lived with us, he would be able to keep us safe and protect us, and I wouldn't have to worry. And I would think things like that every night, and they tormented me. As a child, I always felt like I was never good enough. I was constantly trying to be accepted and to fit in with people, but I never did. And so I found it a lot easier to just be alone and keep to myself, because the rejection and the fear of rejection was just too much to deal with. Growing up, a lot of different people came in and out of our lives. Some of them were awesome, but others did some pretty bad things to my little brother and I, things that really messed us up. I started taking drugs at a very young age, and I realized I was actually very good at it, and so I found a lot of acceptance in that. My brother and I would sit around getting stoned with our babysitters, who were these 2 teenage boys, and we thought it was so cool, but it set me on a really bad path that would lead me to some very dark places later in life. Our family definitely weren't Christian people, but we were connected to the Anglican church through my gran. And so I did have knowledge of God. I knew he existed, but I knew we weren't living good lives, and knew that meant we weren't going to be going to heaven. So when I was about 9, I went to the neighbours and I asked them if I could start going to church with them. So for the next 2 or 3 years, I'd get ready every Sunday morning and I'd go to their house, and then they would take me with them to Sunday school. I loved it so much, and I tried my hardest with my limited understanding to serve God. But once I hit those teenage years and high school, I got caught up in life, and I drifted away from going to Sunday school and church, and I pushed God to the side. My mum had met my stepdad by now, and they had a baby, and she was pregnant with baby number 2. And so they had their little family going on, and I felt very pushed out, almost like an intruder in this new little family. And it wasn't because of anything that they did, it was me. I had this deep desire to just belong and to be accepted, but I couldn't make myself fit anywhere. So it was at this time, when I was 14 years old, that I met Mike. So we became boyfriend and girlfriend, and for the first time ever, I felt loved and I felt wanted. Everyone was very against us being together because he was 18, but I didn't care. I had this newfound security and acceptance that I'd been looking for my whole life, and I wasn't going to let it go. So things between Mike and I escalated very fast, and after only being together for a few months, I found out that I was pregnant. So I knew abortion was wrong before God, but we really didn't know what else to do because we were scared and we were young, and so I did end up having an abortion. And I was tormented because I knew that I'd taken the life of my baby, and I also thought that murder must be the worst thing that you could do, and so I'd never be able to go to heaven now. So we did try to just carry on with life, but within 3 months I was pregnant again, and there was no way that we could have gone through with having another abortion, and so we both decided straight away that we were going to keep the baby. It was terrible telling our families. Everyone was so upset, but they eventually just had to get over it. I was actually so excited to become a mum. I thought I'd finally have the family that I grew up wanting, and no one would be able to take it away from me. So for the first few weeks after having our baby, things were good, but it didn't take long before it started to fall apart. So I was still really heavy into the drugs, but now I was on a single parent's benefit, and so I had money, which meant I could get even more drugs now. We would start getting stoned first thing in the morning, and all throughout the day people would be coming to score, and most of them were young because we were young, and they would usually stay and just smoke whatever they'd brought with us. I started to notice everything wrong with Mike at that point. Like, now he could never do enough to please me, and I became very demanding and angry. And we started to argue about everything, even the smallest, dumbest things, and it all started to get real bad. I started to hit him when we would fight, and as time went by it got more and more excessive. At first it was only during really bad arguments, but within months it was daily, especially when I had no drugs. Those were the worst times. I didn't care who was around. I didn't care what the neighbours thought. I would just lash out. Sometimes Mike would be holding Danique and I would be hitting him, and afterwards she would have blood on her and there would be blood on the walls, and even worse, Mike would have to clean it all up because I was too upset at what I'd done. And the most tormenting part of all of that was that I still believed in God and in heaven and hell, but I accepted that I would never be able to go to heaven and that I would go to hell when I died. And that thought would keep me awake at night. It terrified me. I felt so guilty. I realized then that in my mind, I think I'd always hoped that God would give me a second chance somehow, but well, now I'd killed 2 babies and I thought that there would be no coming back from that. A friend who grew up in a Christian home but wasn't a Christian himself came over that day, and I told him what had just happened and how I'd lost the baby. And I told him that I thought that God would never be able to forgive me because I'd killed 2 of my babies. And he told me that Jesus could forgive any sin and that Jesus could change anyone, including me, which in itself is such a strange conversation for 2 teenage druggies to be having. But it was the first time that I'd ever heard that no sin was too great for God to forgive and that Jesus could actually change me. I was blown away, but I also wasn't convinced. So my friend left and I went and found a Bible that I'd been given when I was a child. I had no idea what I was even looking for or even where to look. So I just opened the Bible up and it opened straight to this passage. And it was Isaiah 55, 6-8. And it said, "Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he's near. Let the wicked forsake their ways and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on them, and to our God, for he will freely pardon." I could not believe what I was reading. It literally answered all the questions and doubts that I had. God did hear me, and I could be forgiven, and he could change me. But then I thought, no way, it's just too good to be true. But I kept reading, and the very next verse said, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." It blew my mind because it meant God didn't think like me, which meant that it was all possible, that it was real. So right there in my messy room, in our house that had no glass in the windows, only black rubbish bags pinned over the frames, I said, "God, I know that you're real, and if what you're saying here is true, then I do want to be forgiven, and I want you to change my life. And if you do change me, I'll serve you forever." So 2 weeks after I prayed in my room, our niece got invited to a church called the Potter's House. And my first thought was that it sounded weird because I'd only ever heard of the Anglican church. So our niece got picked up for church, and when she came home and she walked up the driveway, we could see that she looked different. The only way that both Mike and I could describe it was that she was glowing. So she came inside and we asked her, "What happened?" And she said, "Oh, I got saved." And we said, "What's that?" We had no idea what she was talking about. So she started to tell us everything that had happened. and she told us that she had prayed and asked Jesus into her heart. So my first thought was that I was jealous, because that's what I wanted. But then she said that I could go with her to the next service, and so I wasn't jealous after that. I was just excited. I was so excited. So I said to Mike, hey, we're going to this church on Wednesday, and we're going to become Christians, and we're getting married. And he said, okay. He was like, yeah, okay. So on the Wednesday, a lovely lady from the church came out to Jena Whanga to pick us up. That night, at the end of the service, we both put our hands up at the altar call and we gave our lives to Jesus. From that day, our lives were never the same. So the first amazing thing was that Jesus took away the desire for the drugs instantly. I couldn't even remember the feeling of not desperately wanting drugs before that moment. And we never went back to it. It was such a miracle. Jesus healed my broken heart. He took away the fear and the insecurity and rejection that had tormented me my whole life. Mike and I got married 3 months after we became Christians, and Jesus taught me how to be a good wife and how to love Mike. He took away the anger, and I was no longer controlled by that rage. He made me a good mum who could take care of and love my baby the way that I was supposed to. My kids got to grow up in a home, both their parents, and with hope for their lives. A miracle. They get to live under the protection of a loving God who fights for them and looks after them. Something I never knew growing up, and that amazes me. God is amazing. I'm so grateful He saved me, and what I wish I knew sooner, and what I want to tell you, is that you cannot heal your own broken heart, but Jesus can. You cannot take away your own sin, those dark things that you keep going back to, but Jesus can. You don't have to fix yourself before you come to Him. You just need to come to Him and He will fix you. There's nothing that you've done that's too bad for God to love you. He already loves you the way that you are. He is a good and faithful God, and He's waiting for you. So don't hesitate. At the end of this, you'll have the chance to pray the prayer that I prayed 25 years ago, to be set free and changed the way that I was, to have hope and to have a good life today. So don't miss this opportunity. It's not coincidence or by accident that you're hearing this tonight. God is reaching out to you personally right now. Don't miss this moment.